Alright, I am finally getting around to reacting to your Bayverse hot takes. This is something new that I want to try doing here and there on the channel. I've seen some hot take reaction videos before and I thought it could be kind of fun, especially focusing on the Bayverse, and this is anything to do with the Michael Bay Transformers side of things. Whether it's the movies, behind the scenes, the video games, toys, comic books, just whatever about the movies, whatever kind of hot take you have. I did get some where it's kind of just Transformers in general, and I don't mind answering those, and I might open it up more to just being Transformers hot takes. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, getting into it, I will probably kind of cut in half my responses to the YouTube comments, because while I appreciate it, I got a ton of those. So combine those with the ones I got from Instagram and my private Discord server, which you can access if you pledge to my Birds of Prey tier on Patreon. I have a good bit to react to. We'll see how many. I'll do a good chunk of the YouTube ones, and then I'll do all of the Instagram and Discord server ones. And now before we start, I am going to just kind of post a screenshot so not worry about saying names. This is just out of respect for the fact that I don't want to mispronounce any names or anything like that or mess anything up. I hate doing that even though it's accidental, so yeah. But first one here, Age of Extinction is the second best Bayverse film, and you know what? I am inclined to agree. I think Age of Extinction is very underrated. To a point, I do agree with this. It's kind of hard for me to say because my kind of ranking of the movies can flip-flop depending on the day, but I really do think that Age of Extinction is a lot better than it's given credit for. Next one says, my hot take is the comic should have been considered canon and maybe had animated film adaptations to premiere on Toonami or something. Dark of the Moon should have been the finale film, and there could be more comics afterwards about an aftermath to Dark of the Moon, but not to the edgelord extent Age of Extinction took it. So starting off, I don't really think Age of Extinction was edgelord-ish at all. Definitely dark, don't get me wrong, but I don't know, I thought it suited as a follow-up to Dark of the Moon. But I do agree that the comic should be considered canon. Even though I love Age of Extinction, my ideal Bayverse timeline, and I do plan on making a video on this, is the first 3 Bay films and all of the IDW tie-in comics. They really do add so much to the Bay movies, and I think that animated film adaptations would be so freaking cool. I know it said I wasn't going to use names, but next up is one from my boy Schmop. He says that Rampage is the best Constructicon design, and you know, that's one I could definitely see. He's very unique. Do I think he's the best Constructicon design? No. For me personally, out of the movie Constructicons, I think that Scrapper, I don't know what it is, but Scrapper is really cool. But I think all of the Revenge of the Fallen Constructicons are great in design, and I do mean that. Every single one of them, they're awesome. But Rampage is the best? I could definitely see it. He's got a lot of cool stuff going on. We got 3 here from Mad Titan. It says Age of Extinction was the best live action movie in terms of story and character development, both for human lead and Optimus. And you know what, to a point, I really do agree. Optimus has a fantastic story, and I do think Cade is a pretty good lead for the most part. You know, and he has a good story, especially just everything with Tessa and, you know, his relationship with Optimus and the struggles going on. I can definitely see it, and I can definitely see that being a bit of a hot take. Next up is that Megan Fox shouldn't have been fired from Dark of the Moon, as Carly Spencer is, while a nice nod to the G1 character, as interesting as a cardboard cutout. You know, I like Carly, but I do kind of agree there's not really much to her. I mean, she has the stuff with her brother being gone, but and Michaela being around would have made that scene with Megatron at the end even better in my opinion, so I definitely agree. I'm not sure that one's a super hot take, but I guess I could kind of see it being the hot one. And last but not least, they say, not Bayverse related, but the Transformers 1986 movie is highly overrated. Only the first and third acts are memorable. The entire second act of the movie is a slog to get through. And man, I agree with everything there. That's definitely a hot take with the way that people just suck off the 1986 movie. Yeah, it's really only the first and third acts. For me, the movie's only good between the start and to when Starscream dies, and then it is borderline terrible between that point and when Unicron transforms. And then when Unicron transforms to the end, it gets back to being at least decent. So yeah, that's definitely a hot take, but one that I agree with. And that's it for the Discord server ones. And now we'll move on to ones from Instagram, and Memes and Artworks has 2 here. First one being, Prime was a little too violent. It was understandable, but it felt a little excessive at points. And I'll be 100% honest, I don't really think this one is all that much of a hot take, because I think that the people who think the violence is too much and the ones who don't mind it are fairly 50-50. I respectfully disagree. I don't mind the violence, especially because within the context of the Bayverse, I think it fits just fine. Then their second one is, last night Megatron design is bad. There, I said it. And you know what? I do feel like that is a hot take, and yet another one I agree with. He used to be my second favorite behind Revenge of the Fallen, but then that's just dropped off over the years. I don't know. I just feel like his face looks too much like a goblin, and he's got that smooth armor and he's just so more human-like. I just don't really care for it as much now. Next up from Camaro B Customs, The Last Night is greater than Age of Extinction. The Last Night is total nonsense, but it's very fun to watch. I would say this is a fairly hot take to a point. I wouldn't agree with it being better than Age of Extinction. I do agree that The Last Night is fun to watch. I had a blast the last time I watched it all the way through. It's not a great movie, definitely the worst of the Bayverse. It does have its charm and it is a fun movie, I will say. Next up here from Cassette Ways, we have Starscream was more in character in the games than he was in the first 3 films. You know, to a point, I would definitely agree. It's hard for me to say how much of a hot take that is because people do complain about Starscream's character in the film since he's not particularly treacherous, but I could definitely see it, especially with some of the dialogue in the Revenge of the Fallen game. It's been a while since I've played any of them though, so I'd have to go back to really see how much more in line with the standard Starscream character he is, but I could definitely see it. Next up here, Age of Extinction is the most underrated Transformers movie. Definitely agree, and I would say kind of a hot take depending on who you ask. Ramen Noodle Art says, Silver Knight Prime is genuinely the worst take on Prime to ever exist, period. And I'm curious if you watch this, maybe I should have responded and asked, but do you mean in terms of design or in terms of the color scheme? I'll be honest here though, not sure how much of a hot take this one is because I'm not sure what the fandom feels like overall about Silver Knight Prime. I've seen some people like it, some people don't. Worst take ever though? It's one of my favorite alternate color schemes for Optimus Prime, so I wouldn't really agree overall. Although of course, hey, if you don't like it, you don't like it. With Cars says, Transformers 2 not having a good and completed script doesn't bother me or ruin the film. It's my favorite film. To a point, I would say this is a hot take, but again, it's one that I would agree with. Revenge of the Fallen is my favorite of the Bay movies. I will still defend it as being better than it probably should have been considering the issues with the script and the whole writer's strike and everything like that. Darthspooby says Megatron didn't get weaker as time went on. He was losing his will to keep fighting. And you know, I would say this is kind of a hot take because a lot of people always point to, like, say, between Revenge of the Fallen and Dark of the Moon as Megatron getting weaker. I might disagree ever so slightly, and I do feel like he was at least a bit weaker, but on the whole, I do agree with you that it is mostly just due to his will to fight. And I feel like him running in to stop Sentinel kind of proves this because he beats the hell out of Sentinel in that scene. Next up from that one band kid, Revenge of the Fallen and Age of Extinction are actually really good movies. I will say that that is probably a hot take, but again, one that I agree with. I might not say really good movies because they do have flaws, but I do think Revenge of the Fallen and Age of Extinction are better than they are given credit for. Next up, the Transformers DS games are the peak of Bayverse fiction. And I'll be completely honest, from what I've heard from people, this really doesn't seem like it's much of a hot take, but I haven't played any of the DS games myself, and from what I've heard from some people, I missed out because apparently they are really freaking good, especially the first movie game. Next up is one from Austin Gillis, and sure. Next up, Autobots have a higher kill count than the Decepticons in the movies. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure this is a hot take just because, like, I feel like it's kind of a fact. But for me, it just kind of makes sense if for no other reason than the Decepticons have an army of protoforms that are basically stormtroopers. So, like, of course, the Autobots are going to have higher kill counts. Next one, the only movie that wasn't amazing was The Last Night, and it's not as bad as people said. Ooh, I do feel like that's a hot take, saying that the other movies are amazing and that The Last Night isn't that bad. All things that I agree with for the most part. And this kind of makes me think that The Last Night has been getting a bit of a re-evaluation lately. It's still considered not great, but I feel like it doesn't have quite the hate that it had in the couple years after it first came out. Next up, Optimus is still awesome despite him being more violent than previous versions. I'd say that's a lightly warm take because again, that's about a half and half kind of split between people that do like movie Optimus and people that don't. I do agree with the sentiment. Movie Prime is pretty freaking cool. Next up, Starscream's design is peak, transforms into the baddest fighter on the planet too. Terrible death. I'd say this is a decently hot take just because Starscream's design in the Bay movies is one of the more controversial designs. I love his design. I agree it is peak. It's a top 5 Bay design for me. The F-22 is pretty cool. And then terrible death. I don't necessarily agree with that. I kind of dig the whole thing of like most versions of Starscream, including this one I guess, are kind of bullies. And I kind of find it funny that he thinks he can bully a little human. He ends up being being killed by said human. I get why people would call it a terrible death though, because he is flailing around for almost no reason. I get it, your eye's not having a good time, but part of me is just like, dude, just go up. That death could have been avoided for sure, but I do at least like the intention behind it. And that's it for the Instagram ones. Now getting into the YouTube ones, and like I said, these will kind of be split apart, and there will be a part 2 with finishing off the rest of the YouTube ones. So starting off here, Transformers Knight Optimus Prime design was good. It just needed more well-defined lore and time. I don't mind the Knight design. I definitely feel like it could have used more truck parts, and I do kind of prefer the concept art version that did have more truck parts, and there definitely should have been more lore for it. I do think this is a more of a warm take, I guess I'll say. I do know that the Knight design is popular, but you do have a very vocal group that doesn't like it just because of not really looking like a Transformer. Megatron 2007 has the best design. It's hard for me to get a gauge on how hot or cold this take is. I'm gonna say it's warm though, just because there are people out there that don't like the 2007 Megatron design. I do see a good bit of hate for it here and there, but I see a lot of love for it as well. I love the 2007 Megatron design, so I agree with this, even though he's my second favorite of the Bay movie Megatron designs. Next up here, the Skids and Mudflap controversy being racist stereotypes is stupid. Transformers have always taken different forms of stereotypical caricatures as characters since the beginning. Jazz, whose personality was overtly black, didn't have such a huge outcry. To me, the main reason for the outrage was because Skids was voiced by Tom Kenny, who's a Caucasian, while Jazz and Mudflap were voiced by black actors. They deserve Studio Series toys pronto. This is a scorching hot take from what I've gathered from seeing people discuss Skids and Mudflap, but man, do I agree with everything here. I think the controversy behind them is stupid. I think people trying to say that the way they act as racist is stupid, because I will always say that kind of personality is not limited to one race of people. Anybody can act like that. The designs aren't racist. People love to try to say that they look like old racist cartoons and drawings, and I just don't agree with that, and there's no proof that was ever the intention. At best, it's a theory, and a dumb one at that. So yeah, I do definitely agree with you, and it really kind of sucks that this is a hot take. And not only that, but that people will fuss at you for it, and I'm sure we'll see some of those in the comments of this, who freaking knows. Next up, Hasbro should have made an animated TV series which included the in-between events between the movies like the comics and expanded. Since many people like me didn't know about the comics, and as CGI cost tons, Hasbro should have done something like this. Age of Extinction should have been about the Maximals trying to stop the Predacons from altering the past by doing time travel and get stuck in it, or Age of Extinction could be about Unicron's henchmen. I like the ideas of Cybertronians in human history, but not involved in everything. And I feel like that might be on the cooler side of takes, because I feel like pretty much anybody would have been up for an animated series kind of set in between the movies and whatnot. And these other ideas, like what Age of Extinction should have been about, I think these are cool ideas. I'm not sure I would have gone for it for Age of Extinction, but I do like some of these ideas, and I definitely think we need a dedicated Maximals and Predacons Beast Wars type movie. Next up, we got 3 here, and I want to say I don't mind doing it for this, but whenever we do more hot take stuff in the future, if you could just keep it to maybe 1 or 2, that'd be awesome, mostly just because of time for the videos, and of course that gives me more to react to in the future. But first one here, Bayverse Optimus Prime is not a psychopath. That's definitely on, I would say, a warm take again, because it's kind of a half and half thing. Obviously I agree. Revenge of the Fallen is the best Megatron design. I'm gonna say that one's warm because I do see that fairly often, but I also see other people put The Last Night or Dark of the Moon or even the first movie over Revenge of the Fallen here and there. So maybe not a scorching hot take, but I'd say it's warm, but also I agree with it. I freaking love Revenge of the Fallen Megatron. And last, 90% of Bayverse designs are infinite times better than G1. I would say that's definitely a hot take with the way some people react to the Bayverse designs and all, you know, G1's better, blah blah blah, it was so cool when Bumblebee movie did it. Ooh. I agree with you though. I prefer the Bayverse designs for almost every character featured in the Bay movies, and I will always like, you know, alien robots that look alien and have a very complex nature to them compared to robots that just look like people in boxes. Next up says, I got 2. Paramount should have gotten another director after TF3 to continue the saga. Alright, so that's the first one, and I would say that's a decently warm take from the people that don't like Michael Bay or maybe felt like his time with the series was done, and some would argue that beginning with Age of Extinction and then of course into The Last Night that he was definitely done. I would say at the very least that's a warm take, maybe not exactly hot. And then the second one, Bumblebee should have died in Transformers 4 or been living with Sam permanently, giving reason to his lack of appeal. appearance. So the first part of that I would say would be a hot take. I'm not sure people would have wanted Bumblebee to die in 4, although maybe this could be a hot take for me, I guess. I think Bumblebee should have died in Dark of the Moon. It would never have happened, but like, could you imagine if Soundwave actually shot Bumblebee in the back of the head and he was just dead? That would have been wild, but never would have happened. Bumblebee living with Sam to give a reason to his lack of appearance, I would say to a point that's kind of a cold take. If for no other reason, then I feel like most people would want a reason for Sam's lack of appearance. Now, of course, specifically being Bumblebee staying with him, I don't know. Even then, I would say maybe that's a colder take, just because, you know, there's a good chunk of people out there that are still tired of Bumblebee, but were kind of tired of him then, so maybe they wouldn't have minded him being gone for at least a movie. Hope that didn't sound too negative. I still enjoyed the questions. Next up, I think Michael Bay unironically saved the franchise from obscurity. So that one, I'd say that's a semi-hot take, maybe more so on the warm side. If for no other reason, then I see this sentiment go around a lot. So it's hard for me to say it's a hot take because there's a lot of people out there that agree with this, but a lot of people push back on it as well. So that's why I'm saying it's maybe more of a warm take, but it's also one that I kind of half and half agree, disagree with. Michael Bay definitely helped the franchise a ton. The movies, the first 3 especially, were huge successes, even if they weren't the best in terms of critics, and Age of Extinction was also a pretty big success. But I will point out, I don't think the franchise was in as bad of a spot as people tend to say it was when the movies came out, because I mean, we got through the Unicron trilogy, and yeah, Energon was rough, but at the time we had Cybertron, or at least Cybertron had just finished. The cartoon was decent, and people loved the toy line. Years before that, we had Armada, which is considered like the 3rd big high point of the series, and really brought Transformers back in the early 2000s. We were still kind of riding off that wave for the franchise. Yeah, Transformers wouldn't be anywhere near as big as it was during the Bay movies or as it is now, but I don't think it would have really gone into obscurity. I don't necessarily agree with that point, but Michael Bay definitely propelled the franchise to new heights. Next up is Studio Series needs some Bayverse commander classes. I am going to call this kind of a cold take because I feel like most people would agree with that. Thankfully, I've even seen people that don't like the Bay movies or character designs say there should be a Bay commander class, especially since, of course, Bay started Studio Series, and it definitely needs to happen. I think a character like DevCon, even though I know he's minor, like, I don't know, I think he'd be a good fit, and who knows, maybe some other characters could have had it, like a Grimlock or something like that, or the rest of the Dinobots. Next one we have, I love all 5 Bay films equally. They are all peak. And I would say that's a hot take, because a lot of people love having some movies way better than others, and then some way worse than others. I actually do consider the first 4 to be fairly even for the most part. The Last Night's the only one that I would say is significantly worse than any of the other ones. Then next we have, the best Optimus transformation is the hangar scene in Revenge of the Fallen. I love the 07 movie way more, but that transformation scene, chef's kiss. And you know, I would say that one is a slight bit of a hot take, just because I'm sure people would throw out there like the transformation in Mission City as the best one. So I would say that is a bit of a hot take, but I do agree at least that transformation is pretty damn cool. Then next up we have a couple from one person. They say, this is going to be a very interesting video because I have a lot of hot takes that I'm not afraid to share. Hey, feel free to share more in the future. I'm very interested to see what else you got. First one says, the G1 franchise shouldn't be a golden standard for the Transformers. Let things evolve instead of copy pasting everything. Just because you're an original fanboy doesn't mean everything has to rely on you. I 100% agree, and I would say that's a fair bit of a hot take because a lot of people consider Transformers only to be G1, or like it's the only good one, or it's the best because it was first, and it gets very tiring to see that constantly. Hell, I did my Transformers is Getting Stale video a few years ago, and that's like the main point of that. I would say that is a hot take just with how some people treat G1, but I really think that you're just spitting facts. No printer. Then next up, Bumblebee was basically a horse girl film. The only reason why the movie was heavily praised because of the Cybertron scene. The rest were completely forgettable and pure nostalgia bait. Man, I remember a friend of mine asking when Bumblebee came out if it was a horse girl movie because they heard that, so I find it very funny to see that again. But honestly, as much as I hate to admit it, I really can't disagree. And that. Oh, yeah, I would say this is definitely a hot take, because I do feel like people do overpraise that film a little bit just because of the Cybertron scene. Well, I think the Bumblebee movie is genuinely good, but I feel like people praise it for all of the wrong reasons. Then the next one says, I don't want to make this into a fandom war thingy, but since I still haven't recovered from all the bullying in the Transformers fandom, I'm going to say something controversial. And first off, I want to say bullying in the fandom sucks. You see it a good bit. I've had it happen to me just for being a Bay fan, and like I've had people question me for being a Transformers fan just because I've liked certain designs, or tried to insinuate that I was a legitimate psychopath because I was defending Optimus Prime. I can definitely relate to this. I'm sure plenty of other people can relate to this. It really sucks that you've had people bully you. Hate to see it. But to get to the hot takes, G1 fans are hypocrites. They complain about Michael Bay ruining their own precious childhood, but they're the one who's actually ruining the fun of the fans who are just starting fresh on the franchise. I would say that's on the colder side of takes, because I kind of feel like for the most part this is facts. This of course isn't all G1 fans or anything like that, but the ones who are very loud and vocal with this kind of stuff, like they really do give the G1 fans a bad name. And unfortunately, I would say, even if it's not all, I would dare say it's a majority. Just the amount of people I've come across with this type of rhetoric and speak and whatnot. And I 100% agree with you. Then the next one is the G1 fanboys who complains about Bayverse Optimus Prime being a war criminal are hypocrites. They act like they are morally superior, when in reality, when the design for the characters dropped, they sent a death threat to Michael Bay. Now who's even more violent? Again, maybe on the colder side of takes, but one that I fully agree with. I would definitely say people are hypocrites when they talk about stuff, and then I really do think part of it is trying to act morally superior, as maybe dumb as it sounds. And yeah, the death threat sent to Michael Bay, stuff like that was crazy, man, all because it didn't look like a cartoon from, at the time, 20 years ago. Give me a break. Next up, I think Shockwave's thigh in the Bumblebee movie is everything. Huh. Then the next one says, Talon, I know this topic is not related to your post, but I'ma tell you, I think you have the cutest voice I have ever heard. You know what? Thank you. I appreciate that. Sometimes I feel like my voice sounds kind of weird, so I really appreciate that. Next up from AIDS Pigeon says, Bayverse ending at 5 is the best thing that could happen to the Bayverse. The last night was a sign that this series is already on its deathbed. With the amount of spin-offs planned for it, that would have ruined and mangled the universe's lore beyond comprehension. With a bogus World War II retcon garbage, all in the name of milking a once successful cinematic universe. You know, I would say that is kind of a hot take with the amount of people that are like, we need to finish the Bayverse, blah blah blah, and even though I tend to fall into that camp, to a point I also agree with this, just with the direction they started taking it. I mean, some of the spin-off ideas I didn't really mind, and I mean, hell, I wouldn't have really minded a World War II thing, but like, on the whole, it really wasn't necessary. At the very least, I just would have wanted to have seen the main story end, I suppose. Even then, it could be argued that The Last Night kind of has a decent ending with the Transformers can go back home and, you know, bad guys are defeated, blah blah blah. But on the whole, I do agree. So even though it's separate posts, we got two here from Hob channel. First one is, the more I watch The Last Night, the more I appreciate it. And I'd say that's a hot take for sure, because the amount of hate that movie gets, but one that I agree with, and I've expressed before, it's at the very least a fun watch. And the second one, Galvatron was cool, and it's a shame he didn't come back in the 5th movie. And this is another one that I would say is a hot take, but it's one that I agree with. I thought Galvatron was super cool in Age of Extinction, a bit underrated. I like Galvatron a lot, and I would have liked to have seen him actually stick around. Next up, I like the Autobot cast from the first 3 Bay movies, but I prefer the Age of Extinction Autobot cast. To a point, I would say that's a hot take. I know people were very receptive to the Age of Extinction cast whenever the movie came out. People were like, oh my god, they have personality this time, even though now, of course, people are like, they were all just kind of assholes, and, you know, just angry, which I kind of find hilarious how people kind of turned against that. But yeah, I would say it's a hot take because a lot of people, myself included, love the cast from the first 3 movies, especially the first movie group. Like, it's really hard to beat that. And then of course you get into other movies, you know, like Sideswipe, freaking love Sideswipe. So yeah, definitely a hot take, I would say. Yeah, I can already say right now, this next one's a hot take. I like the transformation from Galvatron and the KSI drones. For sure a hot take, and again, I agree with it. I liked having something a bit different in that movie. I don't mind the whole like floating pixel cube looking thing. I thought it was neat. This next one says, I got two hot takes. The first one is, it wasn't Michael Bay's fault for the last night's failure / Bayverse decline. It was the studio's fault. I would say this is a warm take bordering on kind of cold, because I feel like a lot of people do blame the studio more so. Of course, you do get people that blame Michael Bay. Or maybe this is on a slightly warmer side, if for no other reason than that I do feel like you could tell Michael Bay was checked out in The Last Night. So maybe to an extent, some blame should go to him. And then the second one is, the writer's room is what ruined the franchise, a bad idea, wanting to make their own cinematic universe like Marvel. And again, I'm not sure if this is a hot take. I feel like it's warm at best. Again, not trying to sound too mean. I do agree with you though that the writer's room sounded like a good idea at the time, but looking back, especially with it just being like, let's just do Transformers throughout history, that really did seem like just not the best thing. And then we'll end part one here with a hot take from my boy Jahoob, being RC, Chromia, and Elita 1 designs and Revenge of the Fallen are underrated. And I would say this is definitely a hot take. I see the RC sisters pretty commonly as like some of the worst Bay designs, and a lot of people don't like it. Granted, you have a pretty vocal crowd that I'm a part of that loves them. Again, motorcycle mermaids, so freaking cool. But this one, definitely a hot take. So this is in the middle of editing, Talon, and it turns out there were a few that I left out from both the Instagram and the Discord server hot takes. Not sure how I missed a few of these, and there have been some that have been posted in the Discord server since that I figured why not go ahead and cover them here, since that's where the Discord and Instagram ones were, and keep part two as just the last half of the YouTube ones that I got on that first post. So we'll start off with the two that I missed from Instagram. Again, I'm sorry you guys. First is, Bay Prime is a good take on the character and his violence is justified and cool. This is one that's kind of a warm take in my opinion, because you do get people like me that love Bay Prime, and you also get a lot of the people that just do not like him, so I'm going to kind of consider it in the middle, but his violence is definitely justified. Check out my video in defense of Michael Bay's Optimus Prime, and a lot of it is cool. Giant robots doing violent stuff to each other, I love it. And last we have here, The Last Night is the most visually beautiful movie of the Bayverse films, and you know, that's what I could definitely kind of agree with. I'm not sure where that falls in terms of a warm or hot, cold take or whatever. I'll put it in the middle, because I know like there's been some good arguments for stuff like Dark of the Moon being the most visually nice looking of the movies and whatnot. I'm debating because I'm not sure if I agree with it being the most beautiful out of the movies, but at the very least I will agree that it is a very great looking film. And then we'll go to the Discord server and check out the ones that I missed and the ones that have been posted since. We got two from Austin, the first being, Michaela would have been a better lead human protagonist in 07 than Sam. I would definitely say this is warm, bordering on hot, because I have seen this said here and there, because Michaela has a lot of potential, especially between her backstory with her father and then her whole role as a mechanic. I just think she could really kind of work, and I mean, hell, the whole mechanic thing is what Charlie was about in the Bumblebee movie, so that's been shown that that can work for a main female protagonist. But a lot of people love Sam. I love Sam too, even though I do have my issues with him here and there, so I'm sure they would argue against that. But to a point, I do kind of agree. And then his second one is, Dark of the Moon is the best Transformers movie we've ever gotten, including in the animated films. Now, as you guys might be able to tell from the date, this was in August of 2024, so this was before Transformers 1 came out, so I'm not sure if that maybe would change Austin's opinion on that. For the most part, to a degree, I agree, even considering Transformers 1. Dark of the Moon just has a lot of really good stuff going for it. Just visually speaking, it's great. The action, hell, the writing, the CGI, it's a great movie. Soundwave in the server says that Soundwave is the most important Transformer in Bayverse, on screen and off screen. I will not be elaborating. I would definitely agree with that when you take into account stuff like the comics. Soundwave is behind damn near everything. It sucks that I feel like that doesn't come off as much on screen, even though he still is doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes and whatnot. So for me, I would say this is warm, bordering on cold, but I'm not really sure how many other people would agree with that, so I guess that would kind of play into it as well. But at the very least though, I think I do agree with you. Savage Gamer Girl 69 says, not gonna lie, I think Shockwave's design in Rising Storm is the best Shockwave design. And I would say this is kind of a hot take, if for no other reason than I feel like people kind of forget this one. I think this is an okay design. I definitely prefer the actual Dark of the Moon design. I kind of wish he would have had that throughout the comic, especially since like the overly G1 head I feel like doesn't really fit, but it is a neat design, and I think Shockwave is a character that's been blessed with a lot of cool designs. We have a hot take from Optimus Prime. He says, Nitro Zeus is overrated, especially the toy. And that's interesting. I would say that is kind of a hot take, because a lot of people, even people that do not like The Last Night, love Nitro Zeus. His design is mostly reused parts, but I still enjoy it. And he does have a cool personality, even though I do agree with Soundwave below Schmop here, saying that it doesn't necessarily fit with the rest of the movie Decepticons, or at least most of the other movie Decepticons. And I actually like that toy a lot. Granted, I also agree with Soundwave saying that it's been better when it's repainted, because the first release was kind of plain. It's still a really good mold though, and pretty fun. And that'll do it, you guys. I had a lot of fun covering the hot takes. I know I had to add in that little bit at the end there, but hey, it is what it is. But thank you to everyone for participating. There will be more of these in the future, and if you didn't hear yours here specifically, if you commented on that YouTube post, you'll see it in part 2, or at least from when I recorded part 2. I got a few comments after the fact, but that was after I stopped taking them. So if you commented on that post past like September, you're probably not going to hear it in part 2. Before we go, I want to thank my members on Patreon. In my average bird tier, there is Schmoptimus Prime and Soundwave from the Discord server, and of course in my bird of prey tier, there is Austin Gillis. Channel support is greatly appreciated, you guys. Thank you. And as always, I want to give a big thanks to everyone for watching, and have a good one.